The World of RPGs, Bonus Episode 1, Onya Svyat. Welcome to The World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe to visit the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host Mo Bots, and in this bonus episode, we take a deep dive into a Bulgarian RPG, Onya Svyat. In episode 1, I had mentioned that the author of Onya Svyat, Emil, had given a detailed description of his game, which was just too long for a regular episode. I think it's a great listen, not only because Emil is a good storyteller, but also because this is a game that's currently only available in Bulgarian, and it's really interesting to hear what he has come up with. I don't want to repeat the introduction because I'm assuming you probably listened to episode 1 first, so let's get right into the game. Onya Svyat is self-published by Emil Vasilev and available in print and download. I'll include a link to the PDF in the description of the podcast. The PDF is 263 pages long and in Bulgarian. The game is full of historical, public domain, black and white illustrations. For example, there's a knight with Renaissance-era armor on the cover. The chapter headings sometimes use different fonts, and to be honest, I had difficulties reading the ones for the different human cultures. So here's Emil going through the book chapter by chapter.
It literally translates as "in the other world," but one interesting thing I would say about it is that it's a reference to a short story by a popular Bulgarian folk author. The story is about an old man. So the author wrote about life in the Bulgarian village in the 20th century. Basically, all of his short stories are about life in the village. And this particular short story is about an old man who passes away and he goes to heaven. He meets St. Peter, and St. Peter is like, okay, you can come in. The old man is really surprised that he's allowed to go in heaven because he thinks he's a bad, sinful man. And St. Peter tells him, no, if you've had a little too much to drink and beaten your wife some evening, that's no problem. So that tells you a lot about Bulgarian way of life in the village in the 20th century. And also, he finds out that his wife is also in heaven. He's like, oh, that's great. I can't wait to see her again. And it doesn't really have that much of a point, the story, but it's a quaint, sweet, short story that doesn't really have a lot to do with my game either. I just thought it sounded really evocative. And also, this author, Elim Pelin, his entire repertoire is about the village. So that's something that I wanted to focus on in my setting as well. I decided to upload the PDF for free download on the internet because I completely understand that RPGs are a niche thing, and especially in Bulgaria, they are very, very niche. So I never really thought I would have a huge commercial success. What I did want to do is create game that I like to play with my friends, and B, sort of play a part in making the hobby more popular. One of the reasons that I wanted to create my own RPG is because I noticed a lot of players spend a lot of time planning out their build. So they weren't thinking in terms of characters and stories. They were thinking about the game in terms of builds and challenge ratings. What I do enjoy in a game is a good story. Because, at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of friends sitting around a table telling stories. It never really bothered me if it says +6 on my sword. I can just write it there. I can talk with my narrator and say, hey, I want a really powerful bow. Can you give me a quest to get a really powerful bow? And they'll say yes, because that's the point of the game. You want to have fun. You want to give your players what they want. Of course, give them some struggle, but don't keep them from getting something. And also, I noticed a lot of people weren't really playing characters. They were playing a fighter or like a warlock. And there's nothing interesting about that character. They're just like, they heal or they deal damage. And if you want to do that, you can just play World of Warcraft or like something like that. I never really saw the appeal in creating builds and taking on challenge ratings. Onya Svyat does have abilities, but you have to narrate them. Like you have to create a story out of your ability and make it a part of your character. Otherwise, it's just not there. Like for example, if you're a caster, there's a bunch of ways to cast magic, but you don't just throw a fireball. You have to gather some ingredients, go find an alchemist's lab, mix your ingredients, and then you have like an explosive elixir. You can't just summon fire out of your fingertips unless you're in the other world. So the other world is the character's imagination. There's no extensive list of spells. There's a chapter on how to come up with your own spells. So magic in Onya Svyat works kind of like the way it does in our real world. You can curse someone, but if they don't believe in curses, it's not going to work. But if they do believe in curses, it is effective. Like they're going to believe they're cursed. It's going to have a mechanical effect on their stats. So, a caster is a bit of a tricky class to play. Or, for example, what else is there? Like you don't get feats. You have to actually make the feat throughout the game. Like if you want to be a mighty barbarian wielding an axe, you have to go through a couple of battles with your axe and then talk to your narrator and go like, I think I should be getting some kind of special talent here. And they're going to ask you, so what would you like your special talent to do? And you go like, well, for example, I want to have advantage when using the cleave maneuver. And they're going to say, sure, you get that, but you have to spend like 3 days in prayer to your barbarian god or something like that. So it's story driven, but not in the sense that it has mechanics centered around manipulating the story. It's more like you have to build a character and not a build. Like you have to create a character that is memorable and has a character. It's not just like a bunch of statistics on a list. There are no racial abilities because I think going like dwarves are good at mining and elves are good at shooting a bow. That's very one-dimensional and very old school. So I can talk about my book. Let me just get it so I don't lose track of things I might want to mention. I'll just go through the table of contents here and talk about what there actually is in the book, and I can talk about different topics as we go, I suppose. The game starts out with an introduction. It mentions what is an RPG and what is Onya Svyat, so how is it different from other RPGs. There's a quick summary on how to be a narrator, how to be a player. There's like a quick summary of the game mechanics, like the basic conflict resolution mechanic. And then there's a quick section entitled How to Read This Book. Because when I showed this book to my friends at first, and they would go like, are you crazy? Like, do we need to read all of this? And I was like, no, you don't have to read all of it. Basically, it's like a simple set of rules that take up to like 10, 20 pages. And then the rest of the book is just cases in which the rules are used as an example. After the introduction, there's the character creation. You have your name, your outwards appearance, and your worldview. These are mainly narrative, so they don't have a mechanical part to them. Though I think they're important because like your worldview is sort of like your alignment in Onya Svyat. Your worldview mostly consists of your vocation. So are you a peasant, or are you like a noble? Are you like a hunter or something like that? And your outward appearance can play a role in the original setting. I think it plays a role in most games. Like, this is a game about imagination, right? And you're playing in the player's collective imagination. So I think it's important that everyone has a clear picture of what all the characters look like. Then there's the attributes. There's 4 attributes in Onya Svyat. There's, well, Krepkost translates as fortitude. Then there's Uvernost, which is like resolve or confidence. And then there's agility and perception. And a lot of the words, so I get the question, why don't you translate it in English often? And it's mostly because it's going to be a challenge in the sense that I've used a lot of archaic language in the book. And that, I think, creates the atmosphere that I was going for. And even if I can translate it in English, it's not going to be the same. Just because English doesn't have some of the words that I've used here. Or even if it does, the word just has a different emotional baggage attached to it. Then there's flaws. There's physical flaws and psychic flaws. The rule is you don't get to pick them. You have to roll, or the narrator picks them for you, because they're meant to hinder you. Like, they're not meant to be something small that you pick because you want to. But like, you can pick a flaw if you want to re-roll some of your stats. And if you want to keep re-rolling your stats, you can just increase the severity of one of your flaws that you've picked instead of picking up new ones. Or you can just pick up a whole bunch of new flaws. Then there's the specialties, which are like your skills. It's encouraged that they're freeform, but as I found out, a lot of people don't like freeform. They want to have a list of the skills they can pick up. Again, they're categorized in practical and theoretical. So those are like your physical skills, like using a sword or camping out in the wilderness. And then there's theoretical, which is like alchemy or medicine. Then there's your items, and then there's your environment, or like, what's it called, like your social circle and standing. And since the original setting of the game is medieval inspired, well, even if it wasn't, like, your social standing and circle is pretty important, I would say, even in our real world. Then there's a section about mechanics, which again go into more detail about how the mechanics work. Onya Svyat is a D100 system. So if you want to succeed at something, you roll a D100, and you have to roll within the limit of your chance of success. So let's say you're in a brawl, like a tavern brawl, and your character has 25 strength, or like fortitude, as it's called here, and they have 25 brawling skill. So their chance of success is going to be 50. You roll the D100, it has to be up to 50. If it's over 50, it's a fail. Pairs are critical hits, and your degree of success is the same roll, but it's not interpreted as a D100, it's interpreted as a 2D10. So if you roll, let's say, 43, your degree of success is going to be 7. That's just there to save time, because I don't really like rolling for damage. I like the random element that you get with every roll. You get from 2 to 20. And I think, for example, in combat, that determines how much damage you deal, because weapons give you a flat bonus to damage. And one thing I didn't like about D&D is dagger deals 1d4 damage. Obviously, it deals more damage as you level up and you get different feats and abilities and so on. Maybe you get like a legendary dagger. But What I was trying to recreate here is the reality of a medieval world. And in a medieval world, a dagger is a weapon. It's a serious weapon that you can murder someone with. And also, like, meeting wolves in the middle of the forest is horrifying. It's not something to scoff at as we're used to as like RPG fans. A wolf can be the first enemy you meet in any game, but a wolf is a beast. It will give you a bad time. Let's leave it at that. Coming back to the mechanics, there's also clashes in Onya Svyat. So if you're affecting someone with your action, they get a reaction. And the way it's resolved is you compare your rolls. So a success beats fail. It's simple as that. A critical success beats normal success. And also, I wanted to mention that the dice explode on a critical hit. So if you roll, let's say, 33, and that's a success, your degree of success is going to be 3 plus 3, and then you re-roll the dice. That's the exploding part, and you add them to your total. So theoretically, it could go on forever. Like, you can get like a really, really big degree of success or failure. There's the rules about damage and healing. Basically, the rule here is that if your total damage goes over your strength attribute, you're in danger. When you're in danger, you have to kind of negotiate with the narrator. So the player comes up with a scenario that's for their character to save themselves. And the narrator comes up with a price to pay. Well, so like, let's say you're in combat, you get mortally wounded, and you can say, well, maybe they'll be able to patch me up for just long enough to get to like an infirmary, or maybe I get like a randomly passing hermit who's very adept at treating wounds, and he'll be able to help me. And then the narrator says, okay, but if we go with the hermit scenario, you're going to be indebted to them, so they're going to ask a favor later on. Or maybe if we go with the infirmary scenario, you're gonna sustain a wound that stays with you. So like, maybe you're gonna have like a permanent debuff or something like that. There's also mental damage, which I call trevogi, that translates as like stress. And here's when the Naonya Svyat mechanic comes into play. So you gain stress when you're tired, or when you're scared, or when you act against your character. So like, if you're a noble paladin and you are forced to do something that's evil, you're gonna sustain stress. And vice versa, if you're like evil and you're forced to be selfless, you're gonna have stress. When your stress goes over your confidence, resolve, willpower attribute, whatever you want to call it, you go in the other world, known as Svyat. The way that works is your physical body stays where it is. So like, you're still there, but your mind goes somewhere else. And you can imagine it like a psychotic episode, like if you're in the desert and like you've not eaten and had water for days, like you get, what are those called? Or if you're under the influence of alcohol or some kind of drug, if you're inebriated, basically any condition of the mind that is not standard waking life. And also, if you're not sober, basically if you're in any different state of the mind, you're known as Svyat. And then magic does become real, but only for your character, or like for all the characters that are under that influence, or like with that condition. So if all the characters are scared to death, or like if all the characters have been put in a trance through a ritual, or if all the characters have had a little too much to drink, they go in the other world. And the rules there are a bit different. Like, you can get elves, or you can get dragons, you can get real magic, you can manipulate reality to your advantage. But also, you have to not forget that your body is still in the physical realm. So maybe if you get too inebriated in the middle of a tavern and you start seeing everyone around you as demons, that might not end well for you because it's actual people in the real world. And basically, you have to keep track of waking, sober, standard reality and also the other world. Once you sleep it off or like drink a tonic to get rid of the stress, or if you're seeing mirages, if you have food and like some rest, you go back to your normal state. There's also, you can get temporary or permanent conditions and influences. Then it goes into more detail about like moving, climbing, swimming, so on. Fall damage rules. There's rules about like gaining knowledge or like using your senses. You can also get knowledge through arcane means. So like you can induce a trance with one of the skills. It's called rituals. And you can get a vision. So like you can divine answers out of the narrator. And also, another way in which you can use magic in this setting is through prayer. And the way that works is basically you appeal to whatever deity you're praying to through the narrator. So, like, all the different religions have different modes of manifestation, they have different requirements and some limitations. For example, if you're venerating the spirit of nature, you cannot pray for something that purposefully will harm nature. And you can only pray for things that can manifest through the medium of nature. So like you can pray for your party to find food in a forest, or like you can pray for rainstorm or something like that, but you can't pray for something that would harm nature or something that nature has no influence over. There are rules for, as I mentioned, there's combat maneuvers. There's rules for mass combat. They're not too extensive. Basically, all the rules I've compiled here, I've tried to keep them short and simple. The rules for mass combat are like there's two parts to them. You can either accomplish missions or like goals to help your side of the battle, or you can command troop formations. And at first you narratively prepare your soldiers and like get equipments and so on, and then you can move troop units in kind of like military war game sort of style. There's also the crafting rules. Some of these act as a replacement for spells. As I mentioned, there's no like healing spell, but you can have the herbalism skill and you can prepare a salve or like a balm to use on someone's wounds. So the game tries to be realistic even when it does magic. Then there's a pretty long section of the setting, the original lore. It doesn't really need a lot of introduction, I would say, because it's basically what we know from our world. Only it's anachronistic. So in this world, you can find anything from antiquity up to early Renaissance, all at the same time. There's no history like in Endival, because I thought people don't want to read what I've come up with. They want to come up with their own stories. So the explanation for that in game is that history is controlled by powerful societies, and it has been erased and rewritten so many times that no one can be sure what it is, and going against like the official status quo that these powerful societies are perpetuating. is very both frowned upon, and it's like a taboo, and it's illegal. So like you would get persecuted for keeping a chronicle of your own or something like that. So there's a bit of social commentary in there, as you might notice. And there's also like, the northern people, which is like a stand-in for Sweden, Norway, Germany, the Low Countries, Finland as well. They're called Futhark. I've named most of the regions here after forms of an alphabet. So the peoples of this world start at 68. And that's the polar reaches of Futhark. There's a description of the old clans. They're like, basically, they're inspired by the barbarians in Diablo 2, because, like they were very savage and proud, and they lived up north. There's the separatist kingdoms, which are mostly inspired by the Hanseatic League. So, like, they're merchant states that in the past separated from the old clans, and they moved on to new ways. Like, the entire setting deals with the topic of tradition versus change. And like, tradition is extreme. It's very obscurantist. All the powerful societies want to keep doing what everyone's doing. And also the other end of the spectrum, societies that would have humanity change are also extreme. There's different factions associated with every region. So like Futhark has the runic oracles. They're like priests who interpret runes, and they teach morals and like the way of life to the old clans. So obviously they're very obscurantist. They want to keep everyone under the old ways. The next region is on page 77. That's like the Albion. So that's Celts and Anglo-Saxons. Mostly Anglos, so like the Saxons are more like in the Futhark part of the world. Again, there's the old tribes, which are more like Celtic tribes. And then there's the Aramorsk kingdoms, which are like Arthurian legends inspired knights and ladies. Then it moves on to Cyrilsk End, which is like Eastern Europe. It's inspired by Bulgaria, Romania, Russia, Rzeczpospolita as well, Hungary, basically all of Eastern Europe. They're very superstitious. So like what inspired me to write most of these were like Uberwald in Terry Pratchett's books. It's inspired by Eastern Europe, and it's very obscurantist, and all the people are very superstitious, and there's the legends of the vampire noble who lives up in the castle, and all the nobles are very oppressive like they were in feudal Russia, and also they like to live lavishly. Then we move on to the Latinian archipelago. That's like a stand-in for Central and Southern Europe, like France, Italy, Spain. And they're very God-fearing people. They have like an organization that's kind of like the Inquisition. It's called the Grey Jury. And for whoever lives under the rule of the creed of oneness, that's like their religion. So it's a bit like communism, but it's like very religious. So it's all about collectivism and like being a part of the greater good, and like sacrificing your own self in favor of the good of the entire theocracy. There's an active resistance within the Latinian archipelago. Then we move on to Orkong, which is this setting's version of the Middle East and Asia. And then there's Kabilea, which is like a stand-in for Africa. and also a part of the Middle East. That's pretty much all of the setting. There's like talk of New World, but keeping in accordance with the setting, everyone who says they've seen the New World or like they heard tales about the New World are frowned upon. Everyone thinks they're crazy and so on and so forth. But if you want to play, like an explorer who goes to a new world, you can do that. There's different organizations, as I said, like the Runic Oracles. Then there's the Oak Lodge, which is like an organization of druids. There's the College of Menestrels and Thespians. There's sort of like a global thieves guild. Of course, they come from Cyrilsko Krajšte, which is like the Eastern Europe part of this world. There's trade guilds going on expeditions in Orkong to find gold and oil and stuff like that. There's an ancient library, which is like the Library of Alexandria, and that's actually where all the powerful societies across the world, it's their headquarters. Like the most secretive, it has a couple of societies within it, like the ancient library, but the most secretive and exclusive one of all is those guys that run the world, so to speak. And then there's a list of equipment. That's one thing I pride myself on, like creating a very extensive list of items so you can find the price for chicken in this world, or like how it's affected by seasons, and like if there's war or peace. There's prices for like accommodation and getting drinks. Again, you get like your stress reduced from resting, or like you can heal wounds in infirmaries. You can get some temporary conditions that boost your stats or stuff like that with eating. Basically, what I wanted to recreate was actual medieval life. And that's a tough thing to do because we don't know that much about how they lived, but I did want to have more focus on the actual struggles of traveling, or like if the harvest was bad this year, that's bad news for everyone. So like, prices are gonna skyrocket and stuff like that. And then there's a list of characters and creatures and also apparitions. So like, even though there is no magic in the setting, you can still go to the other world and you can meet like shades or like succubi, or like what else was there? Talking animals, anthropomorphic animals, or like giants, gargoyles, genies, the whole shebang. There's an adventure in here. It's called The Missing Bride. And it's like a pretty standard adventure. The characters end up in a little village. They have to seek shelter because of a storm. They find out that the mayor's daughter has disappeared. And throughout the adventure, they realize what has happened. It's basically the apprentice of the local herbalist fell in love with the mayor's daughter, but she would, as is the local custom, go to the nearby kingdom to meet the heir. And the herbalist's apprentice didn't like that, so he got a potion, like a love potion, from a witch living in the nearby woods. Turns out the witch couldn't be trusted, so she gave him a poison. And you find him and the mayor's daughter in the forest. Like, he's trying to save her. You can either decide to help him, or you can bring him to justice, ask for help from the herbalist. And you can also try to look for an antidote in the witch's hut. And the witch is like the boss of the scenario. And why I think she's an interesting boss is because she perfectly displays the mechanics of this game. So the witch herself is an old lady. She cannot really hurt you physically, but she's an evocative figure. Like, she's a witch, so she knows magic, right? And the way she tries to deal with you if you decide to attack her is she starts cursing you. And her curses are very powerful. So even if you've leveled up your magic resistance, she can still curse you. And when you fall under her spell, you're basically just very, very afraid. And coupled with the eerie atmosphere of the forest, you start seeing her as like this ghoulish creature that can actually hurt you. And she's a pretty tough boss once she becomes her like Kikimora self. So, as you can imagine, what usually happens is some of the characters fall under her spell, and another part of the characters don't. So, you have a part of the group fighting an old lady, and they can defeat her easily. And another part of the group, which are fighting a giant, ghoulish monster, and they can get killed off pretty easily if they're not smart with like their resources, or like if they don't see cover and don't manage to defeat her. And then there's a section for the narrator. It mentions how to keep things simple, not to overcomplicate your story. You have to give your characters clear goals, and also it's very important that they have clear things that they want to avoid and like things that they want to run away from. It gives some advice on how to reward players. It talks about themes, tone, and tempo. It talks about creating your own setting if you want to do that, how to create a narrative, how to keep it concise, what to include in an intro, what to include in your exposition, your culmination, and then the epilogue. And then it mentions some important details, which are like, as a narrator, you have to know your NPC's goals so that the game doesn't stagnate. Because if you know what your NPCs want to achieve, it's easy to move the narrative and keep the players engaged. And if you just have some bandits there because, why not, then it's not that great. There's also advices on how to create towns or like believable villages and cities, how to create interesting ruins and dungeons for the players to explore. Basically, your standard narrator's guide. This is one thing I praise my own book for, that it has the player's handbook, the dungeon master's guide, and the creature compendium all in one. It has some advice on creating villains that your players will hate. And then it has some random twists for your story if you want to include some. It has short articles on how to deal with some difficulties that emerge a lot in games, I've noticed. And then there's some random tables. If you're not feeling, very creative, someday you can just roll dice to create a story from the random tables here. And that's it. That's basically known as Svyat. I've presented it in conventions. I've gotten some very positive reviews. I've gotten people from all ages playing it, and both kids and adults liked it. I was very happy when some people that had never ever played RPGs really got into it. And I've actually noticed that it's actually people who have never played RPGs that really get into Onya Svyat, because I think people that have already played D&D or like another game have a sort of preconceived notion about how an RPG should be. And for example, if they find out that, what do you mean I have to craft my own explosive potions, or like I have to craft like a healing potion, or like there's no mind control spell, but you can control someone's mind through a potion, or like if you talk to them a lot and like get them to believe you and stuff like that, if you get under their skin. I'm like, yeah, it takes a little getting used to, but it's really not complex once you get the hang of it. And like the idea of just merely cursing someone to cast fear or something is a bit foreign to old school D&D players, because they want to have the spell defined. Like they want to know that it's gonna last for, let's say, 3 rounds, or like it takes these components and stuff. And so, and whereas like here, if something's not in the book, you just negotiate with the narrator. You're gonna introduce it. Like if you wanna have like special technique in combat that you're gonna use, your narrator is gonna come up with like, there's this secluded martial artist that you have to go and meet and talk to. You have to study under him in order to get this technique. And I like that because it enriches characters and it takes away from that build, like planning a build element to the game. And I know a lot of players will absolutely hate that, because players want to plan out their character. They want to know that I'm going to get this spell at level 6, then I'm going to take this feat at level 12, and I'm going to be so OP, bro. But that's just not me, and I wanted to have interesting stories to tell.
Emil also told me what material he's currently working on, but we'll cover that once it's out. So thank you for listening to the first bonus episode of the World of RPGs. A special thanks goes out to Emil for taking the time to tell us all about his game. The music was by Thomas Mutziu, recording and editing by myself, Moritz Botz. Subscribe to this channel for the regular episodes and more bonus content to come.